No, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to present a short case study. Before I do so, I need to offer two disclaimers. The first is that all views I'm about to represent are personal rather than those of Reed Elsevier Group plc. And secondly, the views which I'm about to attribute to various tax authorities are done so for purely illustrative purposes and are not necessarily the views of any particular tax authority. So this is a case study involving a business called Chockmatics. John Smith is a young software engineer who loves chocolate. From his parents' house in Surrey, he's designed a system which will enable customers to order a commercially available 3D printer through his website, to order chocolate ingredients in plastic tubes through his website, but all of which will be provided directly by the manufacturer, so he acts as an undisclosed agent. But the clever part is the software, which enables a hand-drawn sketch of the chocolate product to be converted into a 3D chocolate product which will be printed for him by the printer. And in case you're thinking I've lost my senses here, this technology does exist and it can be seen demonstrated on YouTube. He forms an English company to which he transfers all of the IP rights, which is called Chockmatics Limited. He then realizes he has to take this up to the next level of technology. So his uncle is an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. He goes to the US, where he enlists the help of local experts, perfects the software, builds the website, and begins a global marketing campaign. While there, he meets a charming young lady from the Netherlands and moves to the Netherlands because his girlfriend lives there, and establishes a Dutch branch of the English company, agrees a method for tax relief for the IP which has been imported into the Netherlands with the Dutch tax inspector, and he starts his business. He subsequently transfers the business to Chockmatics BV in exchange for shares to be properly incorporated in the Netherlands. After a couple of months, though, he finds that actually Dutch chocolate is not as good as he was hoping, whereas, as we all know, Belgium is the home of the best chocolate in the world. So he moves to Brussels, where he recruits a team of people, establishes a significant office, and starts his business on a big scale. He believes that technology is a real favourite of the Indian technology companies, so he rents a server in India on which the software runs automatically. So most customers do not call for any intervention by people in the Brussels office, but they can order and their fulfillment is handled automatically on the server. The product is extremely successful, and in year 3 he earns £100 million of profit, in large part from BRIC countries where the product has gone viral, if you excuse my reference to viral chocolate. And almost all the good ideas, however, have come from the US, where people just love submitting their latest sketch to Chockmatics, which then goes into the catalogue and can be downloaded by people, say, mainly in the BRIC countries. Although, strangely, chocolate's still not popular in China. John's uncle happens to be in Silicon Valley, as I say, an entrepreneur in his own right. He travels to Brazil, Russia and India frequently, and while there, helps to undertake the marketing of Chockmatics. John Smith has just taken delivery of his first super yacht in the harbour in Zeebrugge, but he lives in this rather nice house down the road from his parents in Surrey. Following his marriage to his Dutch fiancée, they've now gone to live with his parents, or near his parents. And he's feeling very happy indeed until he receives the following letter from his tax advisor. Dear Mr. Smith, we regret to advise you, well, first of all, we wish you a happy new year and hope you had a restful Christmas. We regret to advise you that your business appears to be subject to the Diverted Profits Tax. And I should say this letter is not going to win any clear English prizes, but I'll go through in some technical detail that Chockmatics Limited is UK resident. Provision has been made between Chockmatics Limited and Chockmatics BV, which was the contribution of the business in exchange for shares, which I think is still a provision, although it's not a provision in a transfer pricing sense. The participation condition is met because the companies are both wholly owned. The material provision, that is the contribution of the business to at least the Dutch branch, if not the Dutch company, results in an effective tax mismatch outcome, as we'll go on to describe, and the insufficient economic substance condition is met. Chockmatics BV and Limited are no longer small or medium-sized, and nothing here is an excluded loan relationship. It is possible that the arrangements might fall within Section 4, which extends Section 3 to a foreign company but we don't think it's necessary to explore that further, as we think we're within Section 3. Now, do we have an effective tax mismatch outcome? Under Section 6, we have a material provision which results in an effective mismatch outcome, as it results in a reduction in the income of the first party, Chalkmatics Limited, which would have been taken into account in computing its liability for a corporation tax. And Chalkmatics Limited has no income, because initially its income was that of its foreign branch, which was covered by the branch exemption, and now it's income of the Dutch BV, which is exempt on distribution to the UK. The amount of the resulting reduction in C's liability to the relevant tax exceeds the resulting increase in Chalkmatics BV's total liability to non-UK tax. And I should explain that Chalkmatics BV imported this very valuable IP at full market value into the Netherlands and is allowed to amortise that IP over a 10-year period. So for the first 10 years, it will pay almost no tax. After 10 years, then it will be fully tax-paying in the Netherlands if it carries on business there. Chalkmatics BV does not meet the 80% payment test, therefore. So it doesn't pay an amount of tax at least 80%, or equal to at least 80% of the resulting reduction in Chalkmatics Limited's liability. It also meets the insufficient economic substance condition. Now, under 7.4, the effective tax mismatch outcome is referable to a single transaction, which again is the transfer of the business in exchange for shares. Both companies taken together find that the financial benefit of the tax reduction is greater than any other financial benefit referable to the transaction. And it is therefore reasonable to, it is reasonable to assume that the transaction was designed to secure the tax reduction. Now, we advise you, Mr. Smith, that there are a number of factors here which are not helpful if presented before a tribunal. The fact that you continue to live in the UK, that even while you were in the Netherlands you returned home every weekend, that you did work at home in the UK for significant periods of time. It's clear that your heart wasn't in the Netherlands because you moved after only 3 months, and although you have an office in Belgium, it doesn't seem that your heart is there either. So we think that if the facts were presented appropriately, it would be possible for a reasonable person to assume, or to think that another reasonable person might assume, that the transaction was designed to secure the tax reduction. A person under Section 7.6b could be party to a transaction where the contribution of economic value to the transaction or series of transactions by that person, Chalkmatics BV, in terms of the functions or activities that the staff of that person perform, is less than the financial benefit of the tax reduction. Keep in mind that the process works automatically on the server and the software was all developed while Mr. Smith was in the UK or the US. So therefore we think that arguably the economic value contributed by your team in Brussels is rather modest. And under Section 8, in case of any doubt, a transaction is designed to secure a tax reduction whether or not it's also designed to secure any commercial or other objectives. So we understand that Belgium is the home of the finest chocolate in the world, but that by itself doesn't help us here. So then we come in Section 10 to calculating the taxable diverted profits. And at first sight, we felt reassured by subsection 3. The diverted profits arising to Chalkmatics Limited equal the additional profits chargeable to corporation tax not included in an assessment, in other words, all the profit, and which are chargeable to corporation tax by reason of the application of Part 4 of TIOPA 2010, under transfer pricing rules. Well, no transfer pricing rules would attribute the profit to Chalkmatics Limited. So therefore, we seem to be fine until we turn to subsection 5. If it's reasonable to assume that the material provision, the contribution of the business in exchange for shares, would not have been made in the absence of the effective tax mismatch outcome, taxable diverted profits arising are determined above on the assumption that instead of the material provision, such alternative provision had been made, as is just and reasonable to assume would have been made in the absence of the effective tax mismatch outcome mentioned above. And I'm sure you've got there before me, that means the transaction would be disregarded. So, the profit that should have been accounted for in the UK was £100 million, and the diverted profits tax imposes a charge of £25 million. Now, Mr. Smith, unfortunately, we need to continue to consider the position in Belgium. The Belgian authorities feel that all of the people functions are located in Belgium. The fact that you spend your weekends in the UK is, of course, irrelevant. They feel that at least 70% of the profit is attributable to the people functions, because after all, we always attribute profits to people functions. So they wish to tax £70 million at the 33.99% currently applicable, and we've kindly rounded the 23.79 for your convenience to £24 million. Now, in the US, we understand that the international examiner takes a slightly different view. They are aware of the fact that the successful designs originate mainly in the US. This is because their various sons and daughters are busy designing Chogmatics patterns which have been quite successful in their own right. Now they feel that the designs represent at least 60% of the value chain. The reason they say this is that the 3D printing technology is available to anyone who can buy a printer. The procurement of the ingredients is fairly routine. In fact, the operation of the website is quite routine. So what is there to this business other than the designs, which are all produced in the US? So we think that they will argue you have a permanent establishment in the US. Now, you may feel that this is unreasonable as there are no people in the US. So we turn to BEPS Action 7, the report issued last November on preventing the artificial avoidance of PE status. Now, paragraph 28 indicates that concerns have been expressed that some enterprises attempt to extend the scope of the exception from PE status for preparatory and auxiliary activities by disguising what is in reality the collection of information for other enterprises by repackaging the information collected into reports prepared for those enterprises. So they propose to delete the wording, the maintenance of a fixed place of business solely for the purpose of collecting information for the enterprise as one of the exceptions from the definition of permanent establishment. We therefore feel that there are various bases on which there is a US permanent establishment. Well, this paragraph having been deleted, it doesn't really matter whether you have anyone left in the US as long as that collection is going on, which it is. But in any case, you have your uncle in Silicon Valley. And alternatively, perhaps the information is being provided to Chogmatics Limited if HMRC's argument is correct rather than BV being a sham, and therefore it falls within the commentary here that it's being provided for another enterprise. Anyway, whatever the argument, you have a permanent establishment and will pay 40% tax on what we consider appropriate to be 60% of the profits, so that's another £24 million. Now, Mr. Smith, please bear with us, because we need to consider the position in Brazil, Russia and India. 70% of sales are in these countries, and the authorities have been following the work of the Digital Economy Task Force of the OECD with great interest. They believe that, as set out in the paper on the digital economy, Chogmatics BV or Limited, they're not sure which, but only one will do, has a fully dematerialised digital activity and a significant digital presence. Briefly, for your information, a fully dematerialised digital activity set out on page 144 of the report. The core business relies on digital services. There are no physical elements involved. Contracts are concluded remotely. Payments made through credit cards. Websites, the only means to enter into the relationship with the enterprise. Profits attributable to digital services. Tax residence elsewhere. And the actual performance does not require physical presence other than that of a computer. Please recall, Mr. Smith, that the digital printer is something that you have purchased and own, and the chocolate products are provided from abroad. Under box 8.2 on the following page, a significant digital presence arises if there are a significant number of contracts, the digital services are widely used or consumed, substantial payments arise, and there's an existing branch of the enterprise which offers some secondary functions. Well, we note that your uncle has been visiting, quite visibly, Brazil, India and Russia on a frequent basis and has conducted rather visible marketing activities, so we feel this counts. And therefore, we think that 70% of your profit should be taxed here at a rate of 30%. We'll only tax half of the profit because we think there are other functions involved here on 70% of the turnover, so that roughly 30% tax comes out at £10.5 million. Now, Mr. Smith, the story is not quite concluded because, very briefly, India takes a certain view as regards the presence of your server. The Indian view to digital commerce was set out in relation to BEPS in their response to the United Nations questionnaire on BEPS a couple of years ago. I won't read this in too much detail in view of the time, but they say, for example, that the significant base erosion caused by the inadequacy of existing international tax rules to allocate profits to countries from where those profits are sourced, in particular the irrelevance of physical presence as a criteria for allocating taxing rights to source countries in case of digital enterprises. There are a number of paragraphs in the commentary to the OECD Model Treaty, which again I won't read in detail in view of the time, but the slides will be available, But India clearly does take the view that the mere existence of a server, depending on the activities carried on the server, may be sufficient to constitute a permanent establishment. And here we have a server serving customers without any involvement of any of the people based in Belgium. It acts autonomously and automatically and therefore is considered to be a permanent establishment. We think that since the entire business is transacted on this server, that 20% of the profits should be taxed in India at a rate of 40%, giving rise to a tax rate liability of £8 million. Now, Mr. Smith, you may be under the false impression that the tax authorities can resolve these differences among themselves, and you may be excused for thinking this. It's a common misconception. But if we explore this in a little detail, I'll say first I have it on the very highest authority that the Diverted Profits Tax is not a treaty matter. Belgium is not likely to be sympathetic because all of the people functions are in Belgium. The Netherlands is not likely to be sympathetic because you're not paying any tax in the Netherlands. The US is most unsympathetic because the international examiner was heard to mutter that everyone's trying to tax US multinationals, so this is our turn. And in the Brazil, Russia and India are simply following the guidance offered to them by the OECD process. In India, the view is that the entire business cycle is there. You may have heard of the EU Arbitration Convention, and indeed we think this might provide a route to resolving any differences between Belgium and the Netherlands. But since you're only paying tax in one of those, we think this is unlikely to be helpful. And the UK, once again, feels that the Diverted Profits Tax is not within the scope of the convention. Mandatory binding arbitration is something you may have heard of, not relevant here. And you may be considering a multilateral advanced pricing agreement. Mr. Smith, we enjoy long-term relationships with our clients. We'd be delighted to assist you. So your in total tax liability is 122%. Mr. Smith, we conclude by thanking you for your commendable contribution to the deficit reduction liabilities endeavours of our various national jurisdictions, and we conclude by wishing you a happy new year.